So today we're going to look for the big picture for the Keynesian model. What is the Keynesian cross? The Keynesian provide us with the fiscal policy, which is the investment saving curve. And then we go for the liquidity preferences, and this is give us the liquidity for money. This is called the monetary policy. Both of them will give us the model. What is this model? ISLM model, or the policy mix that we have it for the fiscal policy and monetary policy. So both of them, we are trying to monitor the total demand for any economy and as well the total supply. The total demand, the total supply will give us the ADAS model, the model where we interact the total demand and total supply in order to look for the impact in the short term. And this is the big picture I'm looking for. So today we're going to start with the Keynesian cross model, ISLM. And we said that we have previously here on the y-axis something called aggregate expenditure, which is the total spending and the total output, both of them. So if I have a 45-degree line, if I draw a 45-degree line like that, this 45-degree line show what? This 45-degree line will give me the relations where all the expenditure exactly equal to the total income that I have. So I am balanced. So this is the point. I think the color, it is not clear. Maybe I will change the color. So if I use another color here, it can give me the best point or the imaginary line. Where all the points are exactly the same and the total demand exactly equal the total spending. So, but on real life, as you know that we don't have this imaginary line. This is the 45-degree line that I'm trying to draw it, which is y equal E. This is the 45-degree line where my income equal my spending, no extra income or no extra saving. But if we go back and I would look to the real life case where we start by the consumption or the household, we have the consumption function. And then the investment, which is the planned and the government. And we focus specifically on the impact of this extra dollar on the consumption. So if I have $1, how much goes for the consumption? And this is represent the marginal propensity to consume. So if I am at this point, let's say for example, and I'm trying to illustrate a point before it here. So this point, I have an income, and let's say for my income is 50, but my consumption here is more than my income. So if my consumption at this level is, let's say 70, and my consumption, my income is 50, this means that I have a this saving point. And this area will represent a this saving point where I have a shortage of money or I consume more than I have an income. After this point, we have the opposite situation where my income is more than my consumption and we have an excess of income, and this is called saving. So when we look to the mapping out for the expenditure, so the consumption function plus the investment by the government spending, this is all of them would affect the marginal propensity to consume. And we use the marginal propensity to consume for the multiplier effect. So we start by the Keynesian, constructing the Keynesian by looking for a closed economy for simplicity in our illustration. So the point at equilibrium, which is point E, and if the firm were producing more, this is a brilliant point. If the firm is trying to produce more, then when they have more income, more output than more income, then they will be able to have a covering for all their spending and they will have an excess of money. So actual expenditure exceeds the planned expenditure. So this is leads what we call it reduction in production. But in real life, we're not reducing the production. We are trying to use this production to export it. So this is what we call it inventory accumulation. If I have an inventory accumulation, I can use this inventory to export. In the model, he said, if I have an excess of inventory, I can decrease the output, but no one pushes to decrease the output that he has. Similarly, at Y2, if another point where my planned expenditure exceed my actual expenditure means that my income is very limited and my output is very limited. So what we do, we increase the production and we have here an inventory drop. So we have two situations. The first one is called inventory accumulation, extra, And the second point is called inventory drop, where there is a drop in production. So let's see what we can do and what will be the effect of tax multiplier. What is the role of the government? The government try to increase the government expenditure. So if our government increases, then we have a shift upward, and this shift upward, it have a positive impact on my mean, on my total equilibrium point. So if the government spend, this spending will shift to the total expenditure line up and lead to increase in consumption, and we have what we call it trigger the multiplier. So what do we mean by trigger the multiplier? Let's say, for example, if I wrote an example right now to illustrate what happened. So let's say that the Y1, which is GDP equal 1,000, and I change the government increases by 100, and let's say that the expenditure multiplier is 4, and this is great, then I can determine Y2. So how can I determine Y2? If the government increases, then it will be the 1,000 plus the change, which is the 100 times the 4, and this will give me the new GDP, and this new GDP 1,400. So this is the meaning of shifting. This is the increase, and this is depend on the multiplier. If my multiplier is small, and if it is humble, and assume that my multiplier is 2, then the 100 times 2, this will lead us to a lower level of GDP. So it depends on the capacity of injections of consumption, our spending of government expenditure, and this government expenditure accelerate the output. And this is what can I ask you? What will be the new output? What will be the new point? And so on. So this is what we call it multiplier effect. What will be my multiplier effects? So if I have a taxes, the taxes unfortunately have a negative impact. Why? Because the taxes decrease the consumption of the people, and it will have a negative impact. This negative impact, So what will be if I have the opposite to the government expenditure? What will happen if I have increase in taxes? Now suppose there is an increase in tax. If I have an increase in taxes, I have a downward shift. But if I have a decrease in taxes, the decrease in taxes means that my income will be more. So it will have a positive shift. So I will rewrite another example, numerical example, which is important. What will be the taxes? So let's say, for example, the output was 1,000, as I said, and I have here tax multiplier. The taxes is not increasing, it will decrease by minus 100. And assume that the tax multiplier that I have it equal negative 1.5. So this is very nice. So if I want to find the new output, then I will use the old GDP plus. Here I will multiply what the multiplier, which is 1.5, which is negative, and also the drop in taxes. So it will be negative times negative. It have a positive effect, 150, then it will be 1,050. But if I have increase in taxes by 100, so what do you think? What's gonna happen? So if I have an increase in taxes, and the tax is here, what we will see that we will have the new GDP or the new income, it will be the 1,000 plus, here I have minus 1.5 times what? Times the increase in taxes, which is the 100. Then you will find here it will decrease by 150. So it will be 850. So if I have a positive effect, this is due to the decrease of taxes. I will have a negative effect if there is an increase in taxes because my consumption is going to decline. So what we will have here, so this is the impact of the taxes. The impact of taxes will shift upward if it is decrease in taxes, and this will have a higher and higher level of output and so on. So let's construct also the IS curve, which maps the relation between, here is the very important point. It's a relation between interest rate, I have it here. So let the interest rate from R1 to R2, which is the change in interest rate. So what's gonna happen? I will change the interest rate and will make it higher. If the interest rate is become higher, so this is reduce the planned investment. Reduce the planned investment. Why? Because people are going to save more. And this decreased investment cause planned expenditure function to shift down. Okay, so you have to link what will be the relations between an increase of investment on the relation between aggregate expenditure and the output. So here you will find a negative impact because the investment decreased. It is similar to the tax impact on the output. So the Y will decreases and the output will decreases, and this is mean the GDP decrease. But if we go here to look for the relation of IS curve mapping, how it will look to the interest rate with the output, so I increase the interest rate and then the output will decreases because what happened? Because the investment decreases. I think this is a very interesting relation where we trace the relation via the increase of investment, decrease of investment, and how this affected the total expenditure and how this is will reflect on the output. And this is usually what we ask you to derive the IS curve, and this is what we call it fiscal policy. Okay, so this is basically shifting the IS curve. So while we change the R, which is the interest rate, we can map the relation and look for the relation between the government and the taxes and the MPC. So let's say that the government is going to increase government spending. How the government increase government spending? In terms of what? Can someone help? How they can increase in government spending? Maybe through subsidies, maybe through projects, maybe through decreasing in taxes. So this is will cause the IS curve will change. So if the government increases amount of money, the government push $100 billion in green bonds, let's say. So what happened for any R in the G causes an increase of mean of the output. So this is great. Why? I spend, I encourage the economy, the output is increasing. And when the output increases, this means that it have a positive relation on the IS curve. And this is give us what we call it shifting. In this diagram, we shift the IS curve. But what about the previous slide? If we go back, we didn't shift. We are building, we are driving the IS. We are doing movement. The movement is due to the change in interest rate. But if I have an increase in government, we go here where government increases government expenditure, and when the government expenditure increases, this is will make a shift upward, and when it shifts upward, our output will increases, but this is not due to movement, but this is due to what we call it a shift in the IS curve, which is called fiscal policy, السياسة المالية. It can be positive if the government increases and it shifts upward, and it can be negative when the government decreases. So let's go for the loanable funds and what happened to the loans. What's gonna happen to the amount of loans liquidity? So let's go back again and see what happened if the money supply changed. So suppose that the output here changed due to the increase in money supply. I have a huge loanable fund. I have a huge amount of money. So this means then we have enough of liquidity, and this is will reflect because I have huge amount of money, and this amount of money will affect basically the IS curve. So I will drop the interest rate because I have a lot of liquidity. So the output will increase, and this is the effect of the loanable fund. So here we have the loanable funds, but what happened to the loanable fund and its interpretation for the fiscal policy? So while we are challenging and changing the R, which is the interest rate, this allows us to look for the IS curve. So I change the IS curve due to the change of the liquidity, but what happened if the government spending here, increase in government in loan make result in decrease in saving? So if people's saving is in decreases or let's say drop, so this is will reflect on the interest rate. Therefore, output will decreases. So Again, an increase in government in the loanable fund result in a decrease in savings. So people save less. So government decreases, so the interest rate try to increase, and this is what reflect negatively on the interest rate. And all these situations is due to the government spending and how this government spending affect the fiscal policy. Let's go for the liquidity of money, which shows all the combination of interest rate of output and interest rate and output for the money market where we have liquidity. And I have within 2 weeks what will be the impact on the opportunity cost and the preferences of money. We know that the liquidity of money, it is highly affected with the interest rate, which is have a negative relation, and this is called the demand of money, and this is called an exogenous supply function. So the demand for money, it is highly affected by the interest rate. Money supply is the exogenous, and the level of price is exogenous by assumption. So what we can do by using this, we'll try to simplify and look for the demand of money. How the demand of money is going to affect me. We know previously from the previous lecture that the transaction and the precautionary motive, it is the main reason for the demand of money. So if I have a speculation, I will speculate, I will invest in the future. This is will be affecting the interest rate. So let's see graphically what is the liquidity of money, and this is the relation between the real money balances between demanded for transaction or precautionary. So it is the liquidity of money, it's highly affected by the interest rate. So we have here what we call it, if the interest rate dropped and dropped and dropped, we have something called liquidity trap. So I have no incentive, as we mentioned before, that I have no incentive to save money in banks, and the interest rate is not effectively. So if the real money balances demanded for speculation are decreasing, so due to the decrease of interest rate, so there is no need to hold any money, and this is called liquidity trap. Happened when the interest rate decrease. So money supply is a fixed and exogenous factor. The money market equilibrium requires that both of them equal each other. So this is the demand for money, and this is will highly affected by the money supply. So when we build the liquidity of money or the monetary policy relations, or we need to look for the amount of money that we have. So in a short term, we have the money supply constant, and we have the demand for money is having a negative relation, as we explained. So let's say, for example, my demand increases. If my demand increases, this means that the interest rate is going to increase. So if I have a shift to the demand, this is will reflect positively on the relation between interest rates. So here, if I go back again, if this is the original demand, and the people demand more for Eid, for occasions, for what COVID, for all of these things, we find that the people or the government start to increase the interest rate. But at this level, when we look for the relation here, the relation between interest rate and money, but here is the relation between interest rate and the output we have. So we will have that usually the relation between the interest rate and the output is a positive relation. Why? Because interest rate increases due to the increase of demand, and when demand increases, this requires higher interest rate, and this is reflect positively on the output. So basically, this is the positive relation of the liquidity of money. What happens if the monetary policy change? So if the interest rate change, this is called movement. But if we have another factor instead of the interest rate, we will have the shift, as we're going to see. So what are the shifts? Let's see that the money demand is going to change. This is called a shift in the monetary policy. Given money supply, let's say, and money demanded at this point, and we are looking for an impact, external impact instead of the interest. So what happens if the money supply drop? If people take the money from one country to another, as we mentioned in Asia, or as we mentioned in other country, when the money supply dropped. When the money supply dropped, Argentina, when the money supply due to political instability, what happened? The interest rate increased. So now there is a higher rate of interest rate, and at this current level of up. So what will be the consequences? This will be reflected on movement. No, it will have a new monetary policy. Why? Because the money supply has been dropped, and this money supply dropped due to the change of money supply. If we go back to the previous slides, I will return back. Here what happened, this is the demand change. And when the demand change, it make movement. But here when the money supply available in an economy changed, either to the right or to the left, this is drop in money supply, then the liquidity of money will decreases, and then it will shift to the left, and this is called liquidity of money. Okay, so IS and LM curve, we do بقى the bundling or the policy mixer dimension. So given the IS and LM in the short terms, and we have the relation between the interest rate and the output, and we have this point of equilibrium. How we can change the point of equilibrium, how this equilibrium point is a change. So when we see this, we are going to solve for the point of equilibrium point. So IS can be used to assess the impact of exogenous, assess the impact of COVID, assess the impact of also endogenous factor. So the exogenous factor, it is an external factor. Endogenous, it's affecting by interest rate and output. One can also evaluate the effectiveness of the policy mix by the combination. And this is what we call it policy mix. What do you mean by policy mix? Physical policy, السياسة المالية. يعني ايه السياسة المالية؟ الحكومة هتغير النفقات، الحكومة هتغير الضرائب، السياسة النقدية يعني الماني سبلاي اللي موجود في البلد، هل في دولار، هل في عملات أجنبية، هل في عملة ولا لا. وبالتالي monetary policy مسؤول عنها central bank and the physical policy مسؤول عنها Ministry of Finance. طيب نشوف how we can change both of them بقى. How the policy mix, how we can influence both of them. How this make a shift and how this is can change the interest rate and how this can attract investors or making a better economy or increasing the output. So to do this, we are going to look for what happens if I have a lot of amount of money, and pay attention to this word crowding out effect. What do you mean by crowding? They are بيزاحموا بعض، بيتخانقوا مع بعض. They are having a huge money crowding effect. What's going to happen if I have a crowding effect? So in this model, I draw the trapped, liquidity trapped. It is important because if at a very low level of zero interest rate, I'm not motivated, and this is called liquidity trap. When interest rates start to increase, then it will attract me. So, and this is macroeconomic equilibrium policy. Let's say I will increase or show the effect of the increase in spending of government. Now, so government spending change, this will affect the physical policy. وزارة المالية هتأثر في النفقات الحكومية. وزارة المالية أيام كوفيد 19 أثرت في النفقات الحكومية. عملت دعم، عملت سبورتس للبور بيبل، عملت فاندز كتيرة جدا، وبالتالي ده هيعمل لي إيه؟ هيعمل لي shift. So I can ask you what will be the impact of COVID-19 and how it will affect the economy and how this will reflect basically in a certain economy. Pay attention at this shift, it's highly affected by the mean multiplier, which is 1 minus an MPC. So this shift, I can keep the interest rate or I can move the interest rate to a higher level. So this shift, it is the impact on output. If there is a government intervention, حكومة تتدخل لثبت سعر الفايدة, I will keep it at this level. So if the government push money or inject money or support the government, the economy with the spending, this is increases the IS curve. And when it shifted to the right, it make a right shift, and this is will increase my output. When it increase my output, the output increases, and this is reflect on this magnitude amount of money. If the government keep the interest rate, this is called government intervention. But if it leave it to the market mechanism, this is what we call it market efficiency, and the market forces is working, and then we will have here, due to the increase of IS, an increase of interest rate and increase of output. So this is what we have. I can return back the difference between YK and YISLM. It is the crowding out effect. What is the meaning of crowding? They are pushing each other. So I can return back and I will not keep it at the original situation, and this is called crowding out effect. So remember that the equilibrium condition of the economy can be expressed by this is government spending minus taxes. This is called government saving, and this is called a personal saving. So then now we can integrate the interest rate and look how the physical policy, how this السياسة المالية هتتأثر بالادخار الحكومي. And let's see, for example, This is what we call it multiplier effect on output. So what do you mean by multiplier effect? How will be accelerated. But here pay attention. That's something called reducing investment. أنا هسيف بس investment هيقل. أنا هدخر بس investment بتاعي will decline. And this is what we call it crowding effect. So the monetary policy affect the equilibrium in the money market via changes in M, and we will have seen this influence in the liquidity of money. And this is what we call it endogenous. Why endogenous؟ يعني البلد دي جواها داخل جوه البلد. هل في سيولة مالية؟ في فلوس ولا لأ؟ هل في عملات أجنبية ولا لأ؟ So sometimes money is not neutral وبتبقى effective، لكن sometimes money is neutral. يعني إيه neutral؟ يعني it is not effective. وديت one of the most important contribution لكينز ان الفلوس ليها تأثير is one of the important. فالconclusion هنا see how الاي اس والال ام will affect the aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So let's see macroeconomic policy and how it's going to affect the economy as a whole. So an increase in money supply هيزيد بقى السيولة النقدية. في سياحة، في تدفقات عملة أجنبية. This will have a positive effect, and this will shift the monetary policy. And when it shifts to the monetary policy, this means I have enough money, I'm not in need to increase the interest rate, so the interest rate will drop and the output increase. So this is what we call it, reduce the rate of interest rate due to the enough of liquidity existing in the market and the output increase. So in this model, we see how the monetary policy is highly effective, and vice versa. If the money supply is dropped and it shifts to the left, then it is leading to an increase in interest rate. So the two policies, they both affect the endogenous variable. What are the endogenous variable? Pay attention. The endogenous variable, it is in the model, it is in the diagram, interest rate and income. So hence the idea of policy mix is important. We have 3 policy mix and 3 cases which are highly important. Okay, so here we are going to look for the role of policy mix and how this policy mix is going to affect the economy. And we're going to provide an analysis for the Clinton deficit and the German reunification 92 and the liquidity trap, and this is called the money trap. So what happened in Clinton deficit reduction? So they want to decrease the deficit in the government. You remember that we have 4 important players in any economy, which is the household, the business, the government, and the foreigners. But let's see what they did. What Clinton decided? He decided to reduce the deficit. What do you mean by the deficit? The government deficit. So how can he reduce the deficit? He proposed to increase taxes. And this increasing taxes, which is related to the government, so it will affect the IS. So pay attention here. From the previous slides and the previous discussion, how can I make a shift for the IS? How can I do this shift? I can do this shift for the fiscal policy by changing the government spending or the taxes or increase investment, let's say, or let's say, for example, I decrease for sure the taxes, or let's say, for example, we said also I provide subsidies, all these things. If I do them, I can have a positive impact on the economy. So what he did, he want to decrease the deficit. He want to collect money. How can I collect money? So he imposed taxes. And when he imposed taxes, this is will reflect negatively on the IS curve. How this is happen, the people who are spending money become having a few amount of money in their hands. So the IS curve has been shifted to the left, and when it is shifted to the left, then we will see that we have a new point of interest. So he is forced to decrease the interest rate, and when he decreases the interest rate, the output decreases. So at the same time, Alan Greenspan, مين Alan Greenspan ده بقى؟ ده زي مين؟ central bank, the ministry or the responsible about the central bank money supply. So Alan Greenspan increased the money supply in order to stimulate. So after he imposed more taxes, they want to stimulate the economy. How can I stimulate the economy? He increased the money supply. So what happened? Liquidity of money, and Greenspan was responsible about increasing the money supply. And when he increased the money supply, this is new point. What happened? We find that we have a new stimulus in the economy. So he shifted the LM curve, and when he shifted the LM curve, what happened? We have a regain. استعدنا الاقتصاد مرة تانية. How we can overcome the shortage, the output start to increase. At the same time, interest rate, what happened to it? A strong fall in the interest rate. Usually سعر الفايدة في أمريكا ما بيزيدش عن 2%. So 1.52%. Why؟ لأن هم بياخدوا الفلوس بتاعت الناس وبيستخدموها يحطوها فين؟ يحطوها في الستوك ماركت for other activity, investment, and so on. So this is what we call it the Clayton deficit reduction, and this is the steps. So when we recall this case again, we start by there is a deficit in the economy. What we do? So he proposed taxes. The taxes decreed. The IS curve shifted to the left, and this is the consequence. So the steps. After this impact, what happened? He used the monetary policy and the money supply increases. So this is lead to the shift to the LM curve. And this is the Federal Reserves. And then what happened? The interest rate dropped more, and the final result is lower and lower interest rate. And this is what we call it a regain of the situation. And he achieved the target. He dropped the interest rate, and he have a higher output in the economy. So after we finish Clayton Act, we proceed for the second case. And the second case is the German reunification. In 1992, after this reunification, the German resulted in a large shift in IS. Why? Because they have to spend a lot of government spending, increase in spending and consumption, especially for the Deutsche Mark. So what happened? They increased the availability of money and the people start to spend and the IS curve shift to the right, and this is result in increasing interest rate and the output increase. At the same time, the Bundesbank, which is similar to the Central Bank of Egypt, dramatically reduced the money supply. At the same time, he dropped the money supply. So what happened? The money supply dropped for the Deutsche Mark, and the exchange rate has been set at $1 for the political reason. They make government intervention. So the interest rates start to increase higher and higher, and then you will see that after we have an increase, the drop of the liquidity of money lead to the drop of the output and put the situation to the initial point. The end result of this is the coordination was slightly reduced, the output, with a large increase of interest rate. So conclusion, after we increase the spending, الحكومة زودت النفقات وعملت huge government spending. النتيجة اللي بعديها على طول monetary policy has been dropped, فالmonetary policy end up by increasing in interest rate. المحصلة النهائية سعر الفايدة بقى أعلى بكتير والoutput has been reaching to the initial situation. Okay, what did the liquidity trap? What happened? The trap, subprime based financial crisis. Liquidity trap 2008. 2008 financial crisis in the United States. طيب ايه اللي حصل؟ Trapped, drop of money, كل حاجة credit market has been frozen, consumption has been dropped, بقى عندي large fail in investment في الماركت. مشكلة كبيرة جدا. الاي اس هنا اختلف تماما. IS curve shift to the left. And when it shifted to the left, what happened? Interest rate dropped, output dropped. We have a dramatic recession. Consequently, the central bank make a bailout plan. خطة إنقاذ. عمل إيه بقى خطة الإنقاذ ديت bailout? So he inject money, quantitative easing. So I can ask you, what will be the quantitative easing? يعني إيه quantitative easing؟ يعني ضخ لسيولة كبيرة عشان يمتص هذه المشكلة الكبيرة. الquantitative easing ده عمل إيه؟ It was having an absorption to drop the zero interest rate that we see. So when it dropped, what happened? The increase of money supply lead to what? The increase of money supply lead to a lower interest rate, and this is the only way they can get out of this trap, and this is what we call it liquidity trap. So it started by the intervention of the government through the increasing of money supply is what we call it quantitative easing. And then the policy and the rate of interest rate policy reaches zero. And this is what we call it liquidity trap. No one put money in a bank. And the only way out is a large physical push. The only solution in this is a large physical push. So what we see from this, we can construct the IS curve from the goods market and the loanable fund financial markets. We discussed the shift of the IS, and we constructed the liquidity of money curves and the money market, discussing the shifts. And we do both of them in the short term using the interest rate and output. And thank you for today.